No one held a gun to their heads, and no one forced them to pick up the phone. No one held a knife to their throats and said, "Buy this stock." They did it entirely of their own free will. In fact, they did it eagerly, because the man on the other end of the line spoke as if he were doing them a favor. And that was exactly what made Jordan Belfort the most dangerous and terrifying con artist in American history. Not guns, not threats, not violence, just a smile. Because here's what they never tell you about the Wolf of Wall Street. And I mean the real story, not the Hollywood version where Leo DiCaprio grins at you for 3 hours while you secretly wish you were in his shoes. The real story isn't about one man's greed. It's about our greed. And if you've ever wondered how a kid from Queens with no connections, no references, and no moral compass managed to steal hundreds of millions of dollars from ordinary Americans, teachers, veterans, retirees, and then land a movie deal out of it? The answer isn't difficult or complicated, because it's, in a deeply unsettling way, all too human. Because Jordan Belfort didn't exploit a loophole in the financial system. He exploited a void within us. And we're still letting him do it. What bothers me most about Jordan Belfort's story is this. It's not the fraud. Fraud happens. It's not the drugs, the yachts, the strippers in the conference room, or the whipped cream in the fire extinguisher. Though we'll get to those later. But what really bothers me is what happened afterward. This man defrauded thousands of ordinary Americans out of their savings. For example, a teacher lost her retirement fund. A war veteran lost everything he had worked and saved for over 30 years. Families refinanced their homes based on a stock investment promise built solely on empty promises and cold calls. The court ordered him to pay back $110 million. But to date, only a very small portion of that amount has been paid. The victims are still waiting for payment. And what about Jordan Belfort? He's a motivational speaker, a podcast host, a sales coach who teaches ethics. He travels the world, charging $30,000 a night to teach hundreds of people how to sell. He wasn't just someone fleeing justice. He was someone who turned justice into money. And the reason this was possible, the reason we let it happen, was that, deep down, we didn't want him to be punished. We wanted to be like him. This is the story no one wants to tell. So let's tell it. To understand how Jordan Belfort became the Wolf, we have to start at the very beginning. And the beginning is as ordinary a story as can be. Bayside, Queens. 1962. A working-class neighborhood where ambition was viewed with suspicion and escaping it was something others did. A place where the ceiling wasn't just low, it was a weight-bearing beam. Everyone leaned on it. Everyone except Jordan. When he was 16, while his friends were preoccupied with baseball cards and who liked whom, Jordan Belfort was running a side business selling Italian ice cream on the beach. By the end of that summer, he had made $20,000. $20,000 at 16. Selling ice cream. That was an incredible amount for someone his age. Most kids would have spent that money on a car or a guitar. Jordan, however, enrolled in dental school. On the first day, the dean stood up and gave a speech that was presumably meant to be inspiring. "If you came here to get rich," he said, "you've chosen the wrong profession." Jordan stood up, nodded once, and walked out, because he wasn't there to clean teeth. He was there to find the fastest way to get rich. And if dentistry wasn't that path, then he would find something else that would. After dropping out of dental school, Jordan did what any ambitious young man in his 20s with no professional qualifications but boundless self-confidence would do. He started a meat business, going door to door, USDA prime cuts, flash frozen, hormone free, cheaper than your local butcher. And somehow, it worked. Within a few months, he was making $100,000 in monthly sales. No truck, no warehouse, no infrastructure. Just Jordan and a car full of steaks, going door to door, convincing housewives to buy salmon fillets they didn't even know they needed. Somehow he was pulling it off. But unfortunately, it was a mess. It was disorganized. It smelled like raw meat. And then, because of that, everything fell apart. Delayed deliveries, damaged goods, and unpaid invoices piled up to the ceiling followed. The business went bankrupt before it could even complete its first year. But there's a truth about Jordan Belfort that his victims never fully understood and his followers never fully appreciated. He learned from failure faster than most people learn from success. And what he learned from the stock market was the most important and most dangerous lesson of his life. The product didn't matter. Steaks, surfboards, stocks. It didn't matter what was inside the box. What mattered was what you convinced people was inside the box. He was born a salesman, a very smart and cunning salesman at that, and all the salesman needed now was a bigger stage. 1987. Jordan Belfort lands an entry-level job at L.F. Rothschild, a legitimate company, suits, sales quotas, a massive display of ostentation. This was where he first got a taste of the real world. This was real money, real greed, real power. Here, he learned how the markets worked. He learned how brokers spoke. He learned the anatomy of the sales pitch, how to build trust, how to create urgency, and how to make someone feel not just that they were buying something, but that they were being let in on a secret. And then October 1987 arrived. Black Monday. The markets didn't just fall, they crashed. The Dow dropped 22% in a single day, still the largest single-day percentage drop in history. The phones stopped ringing. Brokers watched the stock screens helplessly, as if witnessing the death of a relative. Jordan had taken his share of the fallout and was fired. In that situation, most people would feel helpless. They would take the time to reassess their circumstances, pull themselves together, and reevaluate their options in life. I suppose we would have done the same, but Jordan didn't do that. He spent that weekend searching for his next opportunity, and he found it. Penny stocks, junk stocks on the pink sheets, the kind of investments reputable firms would never touch due to regulatory rules, unregulated, illiquid, stocks issued by companies that often exist only on paper and on pure optimism. But the key figure was this: a 50% commission. In a legitimate transaction, a broker might make 1%. On a good day, maybe 2%, but penny stocks paid 50%. The same sales pitch, the same psychology, the same fast talk, 10 times the return. Jordan Belfort had an epiphany, and in that moment he picked up the phone. Let me explain how this actually works, because understanding this mechanism is the only way to understand why it has worked so well for so long. Imagine a man. Let's call him Michael. He lives in Nebraska. He has a steady job. He has some savings. He's thinking about investing because his brother-in-law talked nonstop about the stock market at the Thanksgiving dinner. Michael isn't stupid. On the contrary, he's a pretty smart guy. He reads. He pays his taxes. He checks his bank statements, but he's never been called by someone who talks like this. Mr. Michael, I'd like to ask for 60 seconds of your time. If I can't offer you something that will completely change the way you think about your financial future, you can hang up, and I'm quite confident about that. Deal? Great. Here's what I have right now. A small overlooked company that's never even appeared on Wall Street's radar, one that possesses a technology set to revolutionize the entire home entertainment industry. We're talking about the pre-IPO stage. We're at the very beginning. Major institutional investors haven't even caught wind of this opportunity yet, but they will. And when they do, we're talking about at least a tenfold return. I'm locking you in at $1 per share. Here's my question, Mr. Michael. Will you read this in Forbes 18 months from now and kick yourself for not acting? Or do you want to be the person they're writing about? You decide. After that conversation, Michael bought 4,000 shares. The next guy did the same, and the one after him. And the hundreds who followed, because this sales pitch wasn't just a sales script. It was a carefully designed psychological tool, crafted to bypass rational thought and reach that part of the brain that operates directly on fear and desire. The fear of missing out. The fear of being left behind. The fear of being the person who says no when they should say yes. Jordan didn't invent this fear. He just knew how to tap into it in people who weren't even aware they had it. We already knew he was a strategic thinker. For him, it was a piece of cake. 1989. Jordan Belfort and his new partner Danny Porish founded Stratton Oakmont. The name was chosen deliberately. It sounds like an old established company, as if it had leather-bound books, a coat of arms, and a century-old legacy. In reality, it was nothing more than a sales office inside a shopping mall on Long Island, with flickering fluorescent lights, mismatched desks, and absolutely zero oversight. Jordan didn't want experience. All he wanted was ambition and drive. He didn't need people who understood the markets. He needed people who understood urgency, and so he trained them. Jordan developed a system he called straight-line persuasion, a system so methodical and psychologically nuanced that it transformed nervous rookies into machines capable of closing sales under intense pressure within a matter of weeks. He taught them to become people who left no room for doubt and had boundless confidence in themselves. They had learned to suppress their doubts, to steer the conversation in a single direction, always forward, always toward yes. The sales floor took on a rigid rhythm. The phones rang nonstop. Orders poured in. When someone made a big sale, the air horns blared. It was part sales office, part cult, part organized crime syndicate. And it worked. Now let's talk about the core mechanism, because things here had gone from being colorful to becoming outright criminal. Stratton would target a company and buy large quantities of stock at very low prices. Then they'd mobilize the sales team. Call after call. The stock price would rise, not because the company was doing anything, but because Stratton was driving demand with massive volume. When the price hit the target, Stratton would dump everything, the price would crash. They called this pump and dump. At Stratton Oakmont, they called it just another Tuesday.
The SEC would later discover that Jordan Belfort and Stratton Oakmont had defrauded investors out of more than $200 million, teachers, veterans, retirees. These were people who finally thought their luck had turned. By the early 1990s, Stratton had evolved into an entity that operated less like a brokerage firm and more like an independent fiefdom. Jordan had a helicopter, a yacht named after his wife, mansions, Lamborghinis, a personal drug addiction that required its own logistics operation, just about everything you can imagine. But beneath this facade, the structure was rotting. Drug use had become an operational necessity. A broker suffered a seizure on the trading floor. Jordan crashed his Ferrari with his 3-year-old daughter in the passenger seat. Then came the yacht incident, June 1996. Despite his captain's warnings, Jordan ordered Naomi to sail into a storm in the Mediterranean. They were rescued by the Italian Navy. The yacht was wrecked beyond repair. Something inside Jordan was wrecked along with it. While Jordan was making his way through the Mediterranean, Gregory Coleman was on the trail of something far more dangerous: paper trails. Coleman was an FBI agent who didn't need dramatic moments. What he needed were patterns: cash withdrawals just below the reporting threshold, shell companies in Geneva, a maid used as a cash courier with envelopes sewn into her bra. Jordan called this asset protection, and for him it wasn't a problem. The FBI, of course, called it money laundering. And then, as you might expect in stories like this, something happened. People started talking. October 1996. Federal agents raided Stratton Oakmont at dawn. Phones were ripped from desks. File cabinets were emptied. One of them tried to flush documents down the toilet at the time. It didn't matter. The FBI had everything they needed. And in early 1997, while under investigation, Jordan wired $2 million to Switzerland. The transaction was tracked. The conversation had been recorded. That single wire transfer was the thread that unraveled everything. By the end of 1998, Jordan Belfort had no other choice. He was facing up to 30 years in prison, telephone fraud, securities fraud, money laundering. So he did what he always did. Just like the Jordan Belfort, he sold. But this time it wasn't stocks, it was information. He cooperated. He bugged the offices. He ratted out his partners, his brokers, his employees, the people who followed his system, believed in his vision, and built their careers on the foundations he laid. Jordan Belfort was burned, but he couldn't stop himself from burning others along with him. Charges were filed against more than 30 people. Some served longer prison sentences than he did. Jordan Belfort served 22 months in prison. There were no fences, there were no armed guards, but there was tennis in the mornings. There was weight training in the afternoons. And at night, he wrote, he met Tommy Chong there. Jordan told him the whole story. Tommy didn't get angry, he was amused. "Write that down," he said. And Jordan kept writing. In 2007, Jordan Belfort published The Wolf of Wall Street. The book was less a confession and more a compilation of key moments. There were instances of fraud, but they were embellished with anecdotes and jokes. Alongside his self-confidence, he possessed a talent for a provocative wit. But the victims were barely mentioned, and there was little sense of remorse. The public practically devoured the book. Belfort sold the film rights to the book, and in 2013, Martin Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio turned his story into a 3-hour global box office hit that grossed $392 million. Audiences laughed, critics applauded, and the man who had systematically ruined the financial futures of ordinary Americans for years had undeniably become a pop culture icon. Here's the question that's been nagging at me. Why? Why did we watch that movie and applaud it? Why do we buy his books and attend his seminars? Part of it is Scorsese. Part of it is DiCaprio. But I think there's something else, something more unsettling. The answer couldn't be just these actors. Let me tell you about the people the movie didn't give a single moment to over the course of 3 hours. The teacher who lost his retirement savings. He'd worked for 30 years, saved money carefully, done everything right, and then received a single phone call that changed his life. It didn't turn out the way he'd been promised. The war veteran who invested his life savings, families who had to remortgage their homes. These people couldn't secure book deals. They couldn't close this chapter. Most couldn't get their money back. The court ordered Jordan Belfort to pay $110 million in damages. Only a portion of that has been paid. The remainder is protected by legal structures specifically created to keep the money away from the people it belongs to. Belfort says he's working on it. The victims are still waiting. What bothers me about how the financial media handles these kinds of stories is this. The focus is always on sensational events. There's almost no mention of the thousands of ordinary people who lost amounts that are far from ordinary to them. Because what seemed like a small sum to them meant the exact opposite to an ordinary person. Yes, sensational stories boost click-through rates, but a teacher filling out compensation paperwork doesn't. Jordan Belfort once said, "I'm accused of being greedy, but everyone is." And the frustrating thing is, he's not entirely wrong. Not about the fraud, not about the victims. He defrauded people who trusted him. That part is crystal clear. But here's the thing about us. We watch that movie, and deep down, in the part of us we don't talk about at dinner parties, we didn't think, this is terrible. We thought, imagine that. That was the void Jordan Belfort exploited. Not in the regulatory system, not in the SEC's oversight structure. It was within us, in the part of us that wanted to believe there was a shortcut, that a phone call would come that would change everything. He didn't create that part of us. He just knew it was there. Yes, he knew it, and he built a $200 million business on it. Jordan Belfort is still out there, on stages, on podcasts. He charges $30,000 for a speech. He's successful, and the people he defrauded are still waiting for checks that may never arrive. The real question we should be asking isn't how Jordan Belfort got off the hook. It's why we keep letting him get away with it. If you want to understand the systems behind the headlines, not just the wolves, but the cages that failed to contain them, subscribe. Because the stories that truly matter are never the loudest ones in the room. They're the ones hidden in plain sight, and we can't see them. Discover both the stories and the language that brings them to life on this channel.